Imagine the worst day in human history. The sky lights up. Cities vanish in an instant. Firestorms sweep across continents. And then comes the silence, followed by something even worse. A poisoned world. Radiation soaking into the soil, the water, the air. A long, cold darkness as dust blocks out the sun. For humans, this is the end of everything. But here's the strange, unsettling truth. For some animals, it might just be another Tuesday. Because while a nuclear war would be an apocalypse for us, life on Earth is far tougher, far weirder, and far more stubborn than we give it credit for. So today we're asking a grim but fascinating question. If humanity wiped itself out in nuclear fire, which animals would actually survive? And the answers are going to surprise you. First, we need to understand what actually makes a nuclear war so deadly to living things. It's not just the explosions. The initial blasts would kill millions instantly, yes. But the blast zones, as horrifying as they are local. The real long-term killer is radiation and the collapse of the environment that follows. Radiation damages living cells. It scrambles DNA, destroys tissue, and causes cancers and mutations. The more complex and large an organism is, the more vulnerable it tends to be. And then there's nuclear winter. Soot and dust thrown into the atmosphere could block sunlight for years, causing temperatures to plummet, plants to die, and food chains to collapse from the bottom up. So to survive, an animal needs some combination of three things: resistance to radiation, the ability to endure extreme conditions, and a food source that won't vanish when the sun disappears. Now, let's talk about the legend, the animal everyone brings up, the cockroach. You've probably heard that cockroaches would survive a nuclear war, and the surprising thing is, it's partly true. Cockroaches are genuinely far more resistant to radiation than humans. A dose of radiation that would kill a person many times over might not faze a cockroach at all. The reason is partly their simple body structure and the way their cells divide. Radiation does the most damage to cells while they're dividing, and cockroach cells divide less frequently and on a more predictable schedule. But here's the mythbuster. Cockroaches are not the most radiation-resistant creatures on Earth. Not even close. They'd survive levels that would kill us, but other animals would laugh at the dose that finally kills a cockroach. So who beats the cockroach? Let's meet some real champions of survival. Take the humble fruit fly. These tiny insects can withstand radiation doses many times higher than cockroaches. Their short lifespans and rapid reproduction mean that even if many die, the population can bounce back astonishingly fast. In a post-nuclear world, insects in general have a massive advantage. They're small, they reproduce quickly, many can eat almost anything, and their simple bodies are far more radiation tolerant than ours. But if we're talking about the single toughest animal on the planet, the undisputed king of survival, there's only one real answer: the tardigrade. The tardigrade, also known as the water bear, is a microscopic creature that looks like a tiny, chubby, eight-legged bear. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most indestructible forms of life ever discovered. Tardigrades can survive being frozen to nearly absolute zero. They can survive being heated past boiling. They can survive the vacuum of space, crushing pressures at the bottom of the ocean, and yes, doses of radiation hundreds of times higher than what would kill a human. When conditions get bad, a tardigrade can curl into a dried-out state called a ton, shutting down its metabolism almost completely and simply wait. It can wait for years, decades, possibly longer. A nuclear war, to a tardigrade, is barely an inconvenience. They were here long before us, and they will almost certainly be here long after. But surviving radiation is only half the battle. Remember, the second great killer is nuclear winter, the cold and darkness. So which larger animals could endure a world without sunlight, where plants wither and the surface becomes hostile? The answer is the creatures that don't depend on the sun in the first place. Deep in the oceans, Far below where sunlight ever reaches, entire ecosystems thrive around hydrothermal vents. These communities don't rely on photosynthesis at all. They're powered by chemicals seeping from the earth itself, in a process called chemosynthesis. Tube worms, certain crabs, strange microbes, and other deep-sea life could continue almost completely undisturbed by a catastrophe happening far above them. To them, the surface world ending is irrelevant. Their sun is the planet's own internal heat. The same logic applies to life underground. Bacteria living deep in the Earth's crust, some of them miles below the surface, are utterly indifferent to anything happening up top. These microbes have survived for millions of years in total darkness, feeding on rock and chemicals. A nuclear war wouldn't even register. Then there are the scavengers and the generalists. After the initial devastation, the world would be full of the dead, and animals that can eat almost anything and tolerate harsh conditions would have a grim advantage. Certain insects, rats, and other hardy survivors that aren't picky about food could persist by feeding on what's left behind. In fact, we already have a real-world preview of this. The Chernobyl exclusion zone, abandoned after the nuclear disaster, was expected to become a lifeless wasteland. Instead, something remarkable happened. Wildlife returned. Wolves, boars, deer, eagles, and countless other animals now thrive there, in some cases in greater numbers than before, because the one thing more dangerous to them than radiation, humans, left. That's the part that should really make us think. The Chernobyl zone shows that nature doesn't need us. In fact, in many ways, it does better without us. The radiation that we fear so much turned out to be less harmful to the ecosystem than our mere presence. So, which animals would survive a nuclear war? Cockroaches, yes, but they're far from alone. Fruit flies and countless insects. The nearly indestructible tardigrade. The deep-sea creatures around hydrothermal vents. The bacteria buried in the Earth's crust. The scavengers and generalists who can eat anything and endure everything. Life, in other words, would absolutely go on. And maybe that's the most humbling lesson of all. We often imagine ourselves as the pinnacle of life on Earth, the main characters, the species that matters most. But the truth is, we are one of the most fragile, demanding, and easily erased forms of life on this planet. If we vanished tomorrow in a flash of nuclear fire, the Earth wouldn't die. It would shudder, recover, and continue, carried forward by the small, the tough, and the strange. The dinosaurs ruled for over 150 million years and were wiped out by a rock from space. We've been around for a cosmic blink, and we already hold the power to erase ourselves. But life itself? Life is the ultimate survivor. It doesn't need us. It never did. And long after our last city falls silent, somewhere, a tiny water bear will still be crawling through a drop of water, completely unbothered, as if nothing happened at all.